Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Episode 100. Can you believe it? Maybe it's the first episode you're listening to. Maybe it's the 100th episode, though I doubt anybody's listened to all 100 episodes. But welcome. I'm excited. Can't believe we're at episode 100 already. I'm Nick. I'm the host of this podcast, the Family Ministry Podcast, which I call the Family Ministry Podcast simply because we talk about everything related to family ministry, from preschool ministry to elementary to middle school to high school to being a NextGen Pastor that oversees all of those areas, to things that encompass all of the areas like we're going to talk about in the interview today, which is events. We're going to talk about event planning with Jim Murphy, who is the NextGen Pastor at the Covenant Church in Bemidji, Minnesota, if I said that correctly. He's way up there, way north, lots of cold weather. We talk a little bit about that in the beginning there. But I know from knowing Jim that he does a great job planning events, and specifically planning events that are recurring and learning from them each year and documenting that and using a project management system to make sure they do events well, and roping in volunteers. Because a lot of us, if you plan events, you may plan a lot of it and then you get volunteers to help execute it. But what we all need to do more is delegate more of the planning, right? And they do that really well. So I hope this conversation will be helpful to you no matter what ministry area you lead in. And we also have a video that will accompany this podcast. Basically, as we go through, you'll hear him talk about Basecamp, a project management tool they use. And we recorded a short video that kind of walks through, he shares his screen and it walks through how they use Basecamp, what it looks like for one of the events that we talk about. So you'll want to check that out in the post, in the show notes. As usual, it's nickblevins.com/episode 100. We'll have the video there for you to watch, and you can see how they use it. So even if you use Basecamp, great. Or if you want to start using it, that's awesome. If not, maybe use a different tool, but even seeing how they use it, I think will be helpful. So as you're listening to this, if it's the week it comes out, which is probably not most people, but if you are listening to this the week it comes out, I'm at the Orange Conference in Atlanta. And it's one of my favorite times of the year. I love connecting with people. It's my favorite thing about any conference, but specifically the Orange Conference as well. NextGen Pastors I'll be part of, leading the Developing a NextGen Strategy breakout on Thursday, the last session. So don't cut out too early to go to dinner. If you're a NextGen Pastor, we'd love to have you in that breakout. It'll be a lot of fun talking about volunteers and staff and parents and what does that look like across a strategy for NextGen that is one strategy birth through high school. So I'm looking forward to that. Mostly looking forward to connecting with people and learning a ton. So can't wait for that. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Jim Murphy about planning events. Well, today I'm talking with Jim Murphy. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your church.
So I'm up in north central Minnesota, in a small town named Bemidji. It's a Native American. We're at the top of the Mississippi River, the first city on the Mississippi. And I'm in the NextGen leader role here. I've been in this role for about 4 years. Prior to that, I was the pastor to students for about 8 years in this church. And then it was in youth and worship ministry for 9 years prior to that in another church. My family here, I've got a wife. She's been by my side we're looking at almost 25 years now. And 2 lovely daughters, Natalie and Greta. Natalie's in high school and Greta's in middle school.
Cool. I know one thing that I can always count on is when I feel like it's too cold where I live, I can look at your Instagram feed
you can look
negative 15 or whatever.
Yeah.
And be like, I'm good. Yeah, I'm fine. I got to stop whining.
We're still looking at snow right now here, and sometimes it depends on the year. Sometimes the ice goes out and we can go wakeboarding in early April, and sometimes it's not until late May or June even that we can start.
Oh man. Yeah, like a month. You get like 2 months or so.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, we're going to talk about something that's not unique to any ministry leader, I don't think. Like, we talk about conversations that are children's ministry or student ministry or next gen, like your job, where You oversee both. But we're going to talk about events. So really everybody, I think, in ministry, no matter what your role, could relate to this, because I know you all do this well. So what we're going to do is kind of, diagnose or go through an event that you all do from start to finish, because I think the way you do it is really good, especially in a world where a lot of us repeat events. You know what I mean? So
yeah, right.
So from the very beginning, especially thinking first time for an event, how far out do you start the planning for that? What does that look like? Is it a year that we put on the calendar? Is it 6 months? What is that typically?
Well, it really depends on the event itself, but most events we get on the calendar at least 12 to 18 months in advance. And as far as like when we start actually the planning for it, that depends on the size of the event and how many variables are involved, how many people are going to be involved with it, how many volunteers we have to recruit. So smaller events, we won't maybe start planning until maybe 3 months in advance for the smaller things. But a lot of events take a lot of work, a lot of details. You have to get a lot of volunteers involved with them. And so we'll start planning a year out, 12 to 18 months to even, depending on how big it is. So if it's like a big concert that we've got coming into town, we'll start working on that well in advance, because you have to get the venue, you have to get your contracts and things like that. But then if it's just something here in our local building, and it's just something that we're putting on in-house, then we can maybe start 12 months out to start working on it. But then you're working a little bit at a time all throughout that year, just a conversation here, conversation there, a connection here, and so on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What about, we talked about an event that you do that we can kind of use as an example too throughout this. So could you tell us what that event is? Like, who's the audience? What's the purpose? What's it been like?
Well, one example, an annual recurring event that we do more in-house is our Shine Carnival, and that's where it's an outreach for over Halloween. And so we really reach out to our community and invite everybody to come in. It's a 3-hour event from 4 to 7 on Halloween Day, and invite them to come out and do some trick-or-treating in-house here in the building and play some games. And we have food and we have entertainment and kind of a costume modeling show and so on. So that's kind of the example that I could point to that I know that a lot of other churches do. And we start working on that probably ranging from 6 to 12 months out.
Okay, and it was on the calendar a year out, or maybe even a little more.
Yeah, we know that actually this next one, because next Halloween's event is the day is actually on a Wednesday, and we do midweek ministries. We don't want it to overtake our midweek ministry, so back last October we put it on the calendar for the 27th, which is the Saturday prior to.
Gotcha. So you're looking a year out. I know one of the challenges in church world planning, when you do plan that far out, so one challenge is planning that far out, but the other challenge is, what if the rest of the church staff isn't on the same page? Are you all pretty much on the same page that staff wide you're looking a year out so that, there's not a lot of conflict later on?
Yeah, but it takes a long time. It takes a lot of culture building to get to that point where it starts with you. If you want to start planning that far out, you say to everybody else, hey, I'm looking at getting this event on this date on our calendar. So what do you have going on? So it might take your own personal initiative, but after a while, people start catching on that, if I don't get my event on the calendar, they're going to get to it first. And so it really does develop over time. But we are at this point pretty much on the same page. We use Google Calendar to map out our main calendar, and everybody has access to it, and they can pull it into their own devices and so on. So we can look out what's scheduled for our building as far out as we want to. Gotcha.
Now, not like in a real detailed level, but what does the general timeline look like from start to finish? Especially if we use the Shine event, it's on the calendar a year out. Like, roughly speaking, how many months out is planning, and then when's promotion start? Like all that. What are the big pieces in a timeline format?
Well, we break it out into basically there's 4 phases to the whole planning process, and the first phase would be the development. The second phase would be implementation. Third phase would be execution, and then 4 would be evaluation. We start the development phase anywhere from 6 to 12 months out. So, like at 12 months out, we've got it on the calendar. We've already done our debrief from the previous year's event, and we've got our plans in place as to how we want to implement it differently or make changes. So that's already 12 months out. And then we start working on plans to get what kind of teams do we need, what kind of person do we need in these different roles, and we start dreaming about that. And that happens over the course of those few months after the previous year's event. And then the implementation phase, that occurs anywhere between, we do that in about 6 months out. We start really looking at what needs to be rented, what needs to be purchased, what do we need to do in our building, what needs to be created or mocked up. What kind of promotions do we need to do, and when do we start that? And then about 3 weeks out, about 3 weeks out, we start the execution phase where you just start working on, okay, here's the plan for the facility setup. All of our teams are fully recruited and in place, and they know what their instructions are. The final creative touches are prepared, and then it's go day from there. And then the evaluation phase, that actually begins even while we're doing the execution phase, where we're putting things into place. We realize, we forgot to make sure that we put these 2 people together. And so we start the evaluation phase before we've even finished the event. And that runs all the way through till our last debrief meeting afterwards.
Like you're taking notes, basically.
Totally.
Not just like mentally, but somewhere in digital or pencil. Yeah, you're actually keeping a note of a thought.
If you think that you're going to be able to track all the details in your mind by just taking mental notes, you're totally deceiving yourself. You can't remember all those things. You've got to be writing them down. You got to be tracking them somehow, in some way. And everybody needs to be kind of using the same methods, because if someone is keeping mental notes and another person is keeping paper notes and another person is keeping digital notes somewhere, and then you try to remember, wait a minute, what was that and where is that? It's really hard to do.
Yeah, you need one place. Like, I guess everybody could keep their own notes somewhere, but then you got to bring them together in one central place.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a time when we even did. Now, our ministries do the same thing, but there were some like big church-wide events, and like because they were church-wide, you could kind of get all the reflection in the same place where we store the files or whatever, just so it was easy. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Now, ministries keep their own.
Yeah.
Now, when you, real quick, you and I hadn't touched on this before we recorded, but when it comes to budgeting, I mean, like when you're planning something a year out, especially first time, like it's different when you've done it one time. What does budgeting look like? Is it we're just trying to take the best guess we can, and then we work off of that, or how do you do that?
No, I think you've got to. That's hard because sometimes you don't really think of the event until you're already in the middle of your budget year. Other times you can dream of something and you've been dreaming about it for a while, and you got to come to a place where you can say, okay, we're going to pull this off, but we're not going to do it now because we're not ready for it. So we're going to plan for it for the next year. And then you got to do the hard work of, okay, so what is it going to cost? How much is the venue going to cost? How much is the supplies going to cost? Do we need to rent anything? What do they typically cost? And then you build your budget around all those things, and then you put it into your next fiscal year plans. So I think you really need to do the work in advance. And sometimes it's better to just hold off a year to make sure that you know what you're going to do and how it's going to work before you just jump into it, and make sure that you've got the funds for it.
Now, when thinking of the timeline, and you went through the 4 phases there, obviously there's a promotion period in there, like you mentioned. I find that churches want more help with this. You know what I mean? Like, even if they do great events, they just don't know if they feel good about how they promote them, or what does that look like? So what does it look like for you? And not every event's the same, but what does promotion for an event look like to you? How far out do you push it, through what channels, like that kind of stuff? I think it'd be helpful to hear.
Well, we use a wide variety of promotional channels. And it just depends on how big the event is. If it's a smaller one, you can just get away with word of mouth, or maybe some announcements and some maybe a small mailing or something, or social media. But you can, if it's a big one, it's worth the time and effort to really explore all the different channels. So we use a lot of Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and we put up posters around town. We also have a texting service where we shoot out messages to people in our congregation or in our different areas of ministry. But we also make sure that whatever we're putting out to people, that it looks great. You've got to really focus on having great graphics that really communicates well and catches their eye, and it gives them the important information, because the reality is that people don't take time to read lots of text. So you got to get it to them in a quick moment, just a momentary glance at the graphic or the ad or whatever it is. It's got to tell them exactly what they need to know right now. Sometimes we'll use radio. Sometimes we'll put an ad in the newspaper. When we're doing larger concerts, we'll actually put some ads on our local TV stations as well.
Cool. So that's a lot of that. I want to ask two things, but different directions. Let me start with the Facebook ads, Instagram ads thing. What kind of success have you found there? Because you can measure it somewhat. I don't know if I guess it depends on how you use it, but you can measure that pretty well. What kind of success have you found with some of those social media ads?
Yeah, it's really hard. We were just talking about this a few days ago. It's hard to really track the concrete transferable benefit, because you can get 30,000 impressions on Facebook ads, but then you don't know exactly how that transfers over to an increase of attendance or participation. You can see a boost in your attendance, but you don't know if that's from the Facebook ad or from just word of mouth or from maybe the newspaper ad you did or whatever it is. It's hard to tell. But what we've definitely noticed is that as we've increased our use of social media advertising, it has definitely increased our attendance and participation in a way that we didn't have prior to social media.
Yeah, and it's so cheap too, right? I mean, like the church world
totally
is used to mailers. I mean, it could cost you $10,000, to mail 50,000 mailers or something like that, and you could hit those same 50,000 people for like $400 or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Facebook.
And one of the other things that we discovered about like with social media is, sometimes you want to keep a real narrow demographic, but sometimes you can just really make it broad and hit everybody. And it's really cheap. We expand out into a radius of about 60 miles for our advertising, because people they're willing to drive depending on the event and what it is. If it's a big concert, they're willing to drive 4 hours even. So be really liberal with how you use it. Wide demographics have worked really well for us. But then, sometimes the demographic does need to be narrowed down quite a bit if you're only reaching a particular population, though. Yeah. But it's a great benefit.
That makes me think I got to do a podcast just about Facebook ads. You know what I mean? Because I'm hearing more and more churches are using it. We're using it for sure, and I do it for our church. And there's a lot. I feel like it's a lot to learn on the front end, but then once you get it, it's easy to replicate. Just do it for different things.
Yeah, well, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, even Snapchat filters are pretty cheap and fun to work with, and that can create some hype, some buzz that you wouldn't be able to otherwise with just Facebook.
Now, if it's just an internal event, right? So, I don't know what that might be, but it's like promotion is more like communication. You know what I mean? It's not. Yeah, I think of like child dedication. You got to sign up for that, or a transition event for parents. Like, it's not really an external event at all. Is your promotion window the same? I mean, is it 6 weeks out? Is it internal channels? Like, how do you do that?
No, so internally we'll probably do about a month out. That's kind of our minimum threshold. So if we're doing like one example would be if our kids ministry is going to be doing something in the main worship service, that's like they're going to sing something or they're going to do a presentation. Parents, I think, for a Sunday, if it's on a Sunday or a Wednesday, they only need about a month notice. If it's going to be off your typical weekday, if it's not a Sunday or Wednesday, it's more like a Friday or a Thursday, I think they do need a little more notice. We like to go 3 months out if it's off of a Sunday or Wednesday, because families, they're already planning their family calendars for right now. It's beginning of April, and people have their family vacations planned out for the summer. And so we already need to be looking at August and September for planning their calendars, So I think that's kind of our rule of thumb. Depends on which day of the week it's going to land.
Yeah, we're similar in that, like, if it's a week thing, like a trip, it's going to be way out so people can plan their vacations.
Yeah.
I like to be, our church, I would say, is generally in that 4-week mindset. I like the 6 weeks is like my sweet spot, which is more of like save the date essentially, and then really push the signups, like a month out. Is kind of how we approach it. That has seemed to be like a good window of time, because you got to balance. People don't really want to know 3 months out. Like, there's some of us like me who would put that on my calendar. So yeah, sure, tell me 3 months out. That's great. But most people, that's not how they operate. So you can't get too far out and they're like, I'm not even paying attention. What are you talking about?
Yeah. We help resolve that a little bit with we put out a newsletter just for NextGen that covers all of our kids and students ministries, and that goes out every 6 weeks. And so we make sure that we're 3 months out on that newsletter every 6 weeks. So for those who are really into planning and calendaring out far in advance at home, then they've got all the information that they need. But if they don't, then they just get some of our emails or reminder text messages, things like that, or see it on Facebook, and that's good enough for them.
That's good. Could we include like a link or a picture or PDF in the show notes of one of your newsletters? I think people would love to see that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yep. I can do
just
that.
send me one or two or whatever, and we'll include that. Which, I know some people are probably wondering, what text plan do you use and how do you feel about it?
Oh, we use textinchurch.com. And I love it. They had some growing pains early on, and they continue to develop. But I've really had very few problems with what we're working with. And we send out mass text messages to various groups, and we can send graphics along with it. We can send links to forms and registrations. We can tailor it to a particular demographic, or send it to the whole group. And it works really well for us.
Yeah, we switched to that too. We were already using some other system, really just in the NextGen world, but now we're using Text in church-wide. Okay. And I agree. It's like
fantastic.
Something like 96% of texts are read in the first however long versus email. Versus social media, which is even worse, So
it's instant.
Yeah. And we get good responses too, like you're talking about with the quick response. Hey, fill out this form, hit reply, whatever. Like if you just need them to do one thing real quick.
They work really well with it. And the great thing with Text and Church, you can automate things and you can schedule things out. So when you automate a message, you can have them reply with a keyword, and then it'll send back to them a link to another page or another site or something for promotional purposes or whatever. So I love the automation and the scheduling aspects of it.
Yeah, I don't feel like we've used that enough, but I do know right after we switched to Text in Church, we do like a fit to be tied premarital thing, but we also do like a weekend version of it, and it does not have to be premarital. You can be married for 10 years. And I know that our pastor that was leading that scheduled 5 to 10 texts over the next 2 months as just reminders, encouragement coming out. Don't forget, try this week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is like, that's great. And then you could do it every time. It's just every time you do that weekend, send a text.
Yeah,
Which is awesome.
so you can schedule out, text messages if you're going to use that, or you can do this with Facebook and as well. You can schedule out your posts, and you put in an hour or 2 hours of time in 1 week, and you can schedule out all these things for the next 3 months for promotional. It's great.
That's true. So I know one thing you do well is you include volunteers in the whole process. So, most people think about volunteers with like the event itself and the execution and all that, but you get them involved early on. So how do you do that? What does it look like? What roles do they play? Like that kind of thing.
Well, around here, we're really pushing to try to make sure that we build teams in every aspect of ministry. It's not just staff driven, that we have teams making decisions together with staff and lay people. So early on in the planning process, one of the things that we've decided is that we don't want staff being the ones planning and leading all the events. We want our staff really focused on our weeklies and making sure that that's done really well, our weekly ministries. But then all of our events, any fundraisers, any outreaches, we really try to get as many lay people, volunteers involved with the planning and the execution of those events as we can. So we typically have a rule of thumb of at least 3 volunteers involved with at minimum with the planning part of the team. And depending on the size of it, you start delegating out multiple teams. And so if you've got maybe like for instance, with the Shine Carnival, you've got your games team, you've got your welcome team, you've got the food, the meals team, you've got the promotions people. And so we keep track of all the things that we've done over the years and just hand things off to them and say, hey, make this even better. Take this and run. Here's the instructions. Here are the things that we've learned. Now run with it and make it happen. And it works. It works great. People really are looking for ways to get involved with ministry. They want to use their talents, their giftedness, and their skills to do ministry and not just show up and be a spectator. They want to get in and play.
Well, and like what you're talking about, create and lead, right? Not just execute and do. How do you, because I want to talk about obviously how you manage this, because that's something we're going to dive into and even offer like a video of that. But when you have volunteers leading these different areas, do you get them all meeting at the same time, once every couple of weeks or whatever? Or is it you kind of directly lead each one on their own? What's the typical way you carry that out?
No, well, it depends on what kind of team it is. So I guess so the way that we've got it divided up is that we have the planning and the executing. Another way I like to think of it in terms of how Apple uses their phrasing. There's rock stars and superstars. So your rock stars are the ones who are you can totally rely on them to just to get it done, and they're stable and they'll make it happen. And your superstars are the ones who are gonna get out in front and lead and plan and dream. And so sometimes the ones who are just the executing level, there are people who just want to say, hey, just give me a role to play, tell me what to do, and I'll show up and do it. But then there are those who want to be involved with the creating and the planning and the developing, and those are the ones that you need to get together and get in the same room and talking together on a fairly regular basis as far out as you can, to get them dreaming, to get them working together, and to create that cohesion as much as you can.
Now, how do you manage it all? Because obviously, if you're doing something yourself, if you're doing all the work, you can manage it your own way and your own apps and your own in your own notebook.
Right.
You could do it because it's just you.
If it's just one person, it's just yeah.
Yeah, and if it's staff even, you could meet every week and have conversations, and you need some way to collaborate, but it just gets more complex when you involve volunteers and they're not in the same time. So how do you manage it?
You've got to have some sort of system that is available to everyone at all times, so that while staff can maybe work with it during the day, volunteers, they got to be able to get on or engage it at 10 o'clock at night after they get home and get the kids to bed and so on. Or maybe at 6 o'clock in the morning, when they have some free time. So we use an online platform called Basecamp, and it allows us to keep track of multiple projects, multiple events throughout the year. And we can, within each project, we can create a variety of checklists or to-do lists. We can share files. You can get into Google Docs and you can work on files together. You can have discussions about decisions that need to be made. That delayed response is really valuable because you can't get everyone scheduled into the same room at the same time very easily. So if you can ask a question, hey, what about this? This is a mock-up of it. What do you think? Then one person might respond at 10 a.m. The next person might respond at 10 p.m. But within the next day or two, you've got a decision on it, and it's really helpful. But the key is to get everybody to actually use it. Not everyone likes to. Not everyone likes to use it, so it takes a while to get them into the culture of responding. But that's a great thing about Basecamp is that it sends them by email, and sometimes we tell people, "Hey, if you're going to post a question or something on Basecamp, and you need an immediate response, just send out a text message to those people that you need to remind them, hey, I've got this question on Basecamp, go and check it out." And that's been really helpful too.
So we're going to record a video that will show people your Basecamp, how you use it to play in this event, the Shine event, which would be great. So anybody's listening that doesn't use Basecamp, or maybe use something else, or even if you don't use anything like that and you're just wondering, how does it even work? They'll want to watch that. We'll link to that in the show notes. But can you give us a little bit just of an idea conceptually of how you use it? Like what goes in there? How's it organized? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Our Basecamp project for the Shine Carnival is made up of multiple checklists that are divided into categories. And that category depends on what element of the night, the event that it is. So we'll have a games list, and then within that games list will be all the different names of the different games that are going to be played, and then attached to a lot of them are maybe a graphic that goes with it, or the instructions, maybe a Google Doc or a Word doc that explains it, that can be handed off to the volunteers themselves, and so on. There'll be a checklist for what's our welcome plan, what are the banners that need to be hung up, and where do they go? What kind of people do we need to have at the entrance? What do they need to be saying? What about volunteer name tags? How do we keep track of those? And then another category would be like recruitment. Who are the different teams that we need to recruit? What roles do we need to have? And we're constantly adding to that one. What are the different channels for promotions? What are the graphics? And you can attach the graphics to each of those areas. If it's a newspaper ad, it looks one way. If it's a Facebook ad, it looks another. But you can attach those right to the lists, to the to-do items. And then we've got, your print materials, all the different purchases that you need to make, and then all the files that need to go along with all those things.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. And the great thing is that it's always there. You never lose it. So in Basecamp, you've got templates that you can create that are just, you reuse, you relaunch the template and just rename it by year. And you keep track of your template, and you can keep adding to your template. And then when you're ready to go for the next year, you just pull up that template, and every to-do item for every category is right there and ready to go. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. In fact, all the planning that you would have had to do, you've already done. And so it just streamlines it so much more than trying to do it on paper or trying to get everybody in the room and redo it every year.
Yeah, and that is probably my favorite part of any project management, at least in the church world.
Yes.
Is you do so many things, year after year, or recurring or whatever, and just being able to pull up all the information to make it better each year. We just did our 4th year of an event where we use Basecamp to manage it along with some Google Docs and stuff. And it's like every year it just gets smoother and it feels like we reach more people, but with less work. That's what it really comes down to, which is like, man, isn't that what we all want?
Yep. How many times are you sitting in a planning meeting and you're all asking each other, hey, so what was it that we did last year? We were saying that we wanted to change this part of it, but what did we say and what was that like? And with Basecamp or with these notes that you can take in these templates, you just pull it up and say, oh yeah, that's what it was. And you already have made the decision because you made the decision last year at the debrief meeting.
Yep. Now you mentioned something when you were going through how you use Basecamp that I want to dig into a little bit. And that's like how you set your volunteers up for success, giving them instructions and even language of what to say. I don't want to assume that that's something that everyone does. So what does that look like? How did you get to that point? What maybe a couple examples of how you use Basecamp or anything really, but you're planning your event in a way that you're thinking about every volunteer and helping them succeed, which is a big deal when you're talking about a huge event and all these different volunteers doing different things. What do you do there to set them up for success?
Well, like for those who are primarily in that executing role, they just love to show up and do a task. Give me something to do. They need bite-sized roles with very clear instructions. And so the helpful thing about something like Basecamp or whatever system you use is that you can keep track of those instructions from year to year, and you can improve on them, and you can tweak them and make them very clear and detailed without having to rewrite it or re-explain it every single time that you meet with the volunteers. So some of those people in that rock star or that execution role, just bite-sized roles with very clear instructions, and then lots of encouragement and to help them to feel excited about the role that they're playing. But then there are those who are more in that they're the planners and they're the superstars kind of people. They need that creative freedom and that ownership. So to help them, to set them up for success, you kind of got to be a little more hands off with them. Let them create. Let them experiment. Let them explore these new ideas. And then when they go to the execution phase, they've got so much ownership of it that they're going to want to see it succeed. And if it has any elements of failure to it or that didn't work well or could be better, they're going to want to make those improvements. And you don't have to tell them what to do. They're just going to want to do it because they've got so much ownership over it.
Mm-hmm. How about, you mentioned the importance of debriefing the event, feedback, taking notes, putting that in one place. So what does that actually look like for you from, taking notes in the event to meeting to talk about it and then saving it? And then using it? How do you do all that?
Well, because we use Basecamp, I like to have a live review going. So it's basically a to-do list within the Basecamp project. And I've got it on my phone as an app. And so I just have that live review to-do list open on my phone. And then as we're walking through the event itself that night or that day, I'm stepping aside and, you see things as you go. You're like, oh man, we didn't think about this, or that person doesn't understand their role that they're playing, or that person needs to be moved to a different kind of role because of their personality. So you can just step off to the side and quick type it in, or maybe even using your voice to text feature on your phone, just speak it in and it puts it in as a to-do. And then when you are done with the event, then you can come back and you can all gather together for a debrief. That's essential. Like within the next week or two of the event yourself. I mean, sometimes you got to just give people some time off to get some rest after the event. But as soon as you can, get the key people in the room together to debrief, review it, and then take those live review notes and make decisions right there for the next year. And then you drop them into the template as action points. And you've already done your planning for the next year then off of that debrief.
So come back next year, open up, copy it or whatever, paste, and it's got the notes in there. And then you change things as needed or whatever. Well, you've already changed some things, but you may need to do some different things.
Well, more and more, we're just editing the template for next year before we even leave this year's event. So we've already made the plans and decisions for next year by putting it into the template, so that when it's time to launch that template for next year, we already know what we're doing.
That's awesome. That's great. Because we've all probably been there too, where it's like, didn't we say something? We did that this year. And then like, didn't we say there was something about the whatever? We're like, well, we just need to pull up the feedback sheet. We need to pull up our review sheet. Yeah, we pulled it up. It was like, oh yeah, that's what it was. It was because of that one problem. And so that's why we need to avoid that. But we didn't probably take that step you're talking about and build it into the planning of that already. Now for us, I think it was because we were back on the development side. This wasn't like an execution thing. And so as I think about it, it's like, I don't think we weren't really using Basecamp for a lot of that in the early part, but we probably should. I mean, it just makes it easier. You can always tweak it, but it makes it easier to have even checklists for everything from development, implementation, all the way to execution.
Yeah. And that works great for things that are recurring. So like the Shine Carnival that we do, I mean, we do that every year and we love it. And sometimes you're going to make some adjustments, but for the most part, it's the same event every year. And so building that kind of template, that making those decisions in advance like that is easy to do. But, there are those events that you're creating from scratch every year because it's a completely different experience. And that you've got to really just start working the system well in advance to really make it work well.
So anything else that you would add that, from doing events, from doing them, managing them in Basecamp? Again, I know we'll do the video so people get to see how do you actually use Basecamp like that. I think that'll be really helpful for people. And some people might use Asana or Trello. I mean, these are all popular ones I hear of. So, and you can relate it, even if people use those other tools, they'll still be helpful to watch that video and see how you use it for your event. But is there anything else you would add in planning events that have been successful or takeaways or anything like that?
There's a couple things, I guess. Whatever system for planning you decide to use, it just takes a lot of work to get everybody using the same system. And just lots of encouragement, lots of reminders, really steering people toward a common system. When we've tried to have hybrid approaches where this person works on paper, this person works on digital, this person just works on just off the cuff mentally, we are constantly running into problems and mistakes or miscommunications. But the more you can use a common system with your staff and with your volunteer teams, it's just so much more effective and streamlined. So I know it's hard and it might take a long time to get to that point, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I find sometimes you guys just sell people on the idea that, yes, I know it's a little bit of extra work to do this, but it saves so much work for you down the road and it saves work for the team. That's the other part is
it does.
You save time for the rest of the team when you do it this way. But the bigger thing is, especially if it's a recurring thing, you save time next year, which is a big deal.
For sure.
Yeah,
it is. Another thing I'd say is, for us, we've just decided fewer events make room for better events. And that's, you got to pare it down and choose the events that you want to do, and don't overwhelm yourself with doing so many events that you're just tripping over yourself from one event to the other and you're not pulling off any event really well at all. And one way to do that is to map out your timeline and then lay it over other timelines and calendars. So you got to look at your seasons of ministry. There are really intense seasons in ministry, and there are really light seasons. And there are different times when you've got event planning kind of overlapping for 2 or 3 different events. And if you can find a way to map out your timeline for your event and then lay it over the timelines of other events and other seasons, you can identify those moments where you can say, oh man, that's going to be a super stressful season and I don't want to go through that. We need to change our timeline, or we need to not do this event or move it, or you just brace yourself for that really intense moment, and then plan for some compensation, some comp time afterwards, to get your rest. But we found that to be really helpful for ourselves.
Yeah, we just did that recently, actually, because there's an idea that we had. It actually came up last year. They're starting to implement it for summer this year, and a small thing, not an event or anything. But it's not never small. Like, it was going to require work and some resources and some time and all that stuff. And we decided, you know what, we can't do it because we got all these other things we know are coming because we've overlaid the timelines like you're talking about. And our takeaway was, you know what, next year we need to do that in January and February because that is the downtime. If there ever is a downtime in ministry, that's one for us. Just the way the events fall and summer things and stuff like that. If we could do it then and have it ready to go, then we could absolutely have it for summer. But if we wait till, April, May to do it, it's not going to happen. So that's good.
Yeah, that's great.
We've learned that a little bit the hard way.
Exactly. That's so. It's so easy to learn it the hard way, but you have to actually take the lesson that you learned and put it to work. So following up and actually planning out in advance is so worth it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is good. This is really helpful. I'm looking forward to us recording that video. I think people will like that too, just to see what is Basecamp, or even if they use something else, how do you use it? I think that'll be really helpful. So we'll link to that video in the show notes. People can watch that. How can people connect with you if they have any questions? I know you blog as well, so tell us about that.
Oh, sure. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at _ Jim Murphy, JIMMURPHY. I also blog once in a while at thenextgenblog.com. That's www.thenextgenblog.com. And on that blog, most of my history has been in student ministry. So most of my blogs are about that, or like some technology or leadership. I'm trying to do more with kids ministry and young adults. We actually, under my role as a Next Gen leader, is our young adults ministry as well. So those are the primary ways that you can reach me.
Cool, man. Thanks, Jim, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate how you do events, how you manage it with Basecamp, and
thanks.
Really the attention to detail, but the efficiency, the quality, all that's great. So thanks for sharing some of that with us, helping us do events better.
Oh, well, it's really fun to be on this podcast here with you, Nick. Always admire the work that you do as well. It's really great. Thanks for providing this for everybody.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. Well, I don't know what your relationship is with events. Maybe you love them and you get excited and they're fun and you look forward to that. Or maybe you hate them and you wish it wasn't part of your job and you just want to get past them. You love the other stuff. Either way, I hope this was helpful. I hope you took some things away that you can use. Maybe you do a great job with events, but there's a couple pieces or tools or practices that you can walk away with. In terms of action items coming out of this interview, obviously, I would love for you to watch that video. Again, regardless of which project management tool you use, or maybe you don't use any, or maybe you use, I don't know, Google Docs or something like that where you're sharing information, but it's not actually a project management tool. I think you would benefit from watching the video of how Jim and his team uses Basecamp. And so we just kind of walk through that. You can get that in the show notes. And then I would say an action item would be to choose a project management tool, or if it's not a project management tool, what is the tool? What is the software? What is the system that will allow you all to work together, but on your own time? Like Jim talked about, somebody being able to do something at 10 o'clock at night, and not needing to have the whole team or be in one place to do it. I think that's a big win in terms of planning events. And then maybe another action item would be to define your event planning process. How far out do you start planning it? When do you start this? When do you start promotion? How do you delegate items? And that's the goal, to delegate more, right? To delegate more planning, development, and of course, the execution, and to set your teams up well like he does. I thought that was all good stuff. So those are some action items I think of. You can get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 100. That's where you'll find that video. I hope that's helpful to you. If you have any questions, by all means, reach out to Jim or myself. We'd love to help. And I'd love to hear what you use. What project management tool, what have you found to be helpful? In the next episode of the podcast, I talk with Kevin Jennings. Kevin is a marketer who helps people get their message out and do that better through social media and email marketing and all of that. He does some work with Orange, where I am this week. So I'm hoping to run into Kevin. But he really helps us in the interview. You'll love it. He walks through, what are the mistakes you can make with social media and all that. But we talk through a plan too of how can you use it well from scratch? Like, what does that look like? What are the things we should focus on? What are some of the tools that we could use? So I find most of us are using social media in some way. And I enjoyed that conversation with Kevin because for me, it really helped me think about how to use it better and how to not just make it just be another, promotional channel or another megaphone. So I think you'll like that conversation. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I would love it if you would leave a comment and a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to it and share that. That'd be great. It helps get that out to other leaders. But here we are, episode 100. All I can think about is just how grateful I am for you all for listening. I hope it's helpful to you. I know it's helpful to me. I love listening to and learning from these leaders every week. So I hope it's helpful to you as well. I hope you have a great week, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.